Hello readers, writers, and nerds alike, I'm Valerie, and today we're going to be talking about my July and BookTube-A-Thon wrap-up, so let's get right on into it. So in July, I read 5 books, and for BookTube-A-Thon, I read 4.5, which I wasn't expecting. I was hoping to do more, but 4.5 is more than I read most months, so I say we did good. Plus, I'm now ahead of my schedule for my Goodreads challenge, so we did good. The first book I read in July was Vicious by V.E. Schwab. This is a story about Victor and Eli who were best friends in college, and then it shows them 10 years later where they're at each other's throats. I liked it. It was a little bit disappointing for me. I thought it was going to be a bit more morally gray, because that was something that I thought was going to be in here when I got into it. That's one of my favorite book traits. It's in Obsidio, and I loved it. It was in like the first half of the Shadow Me series, and I was here for it. And this one, I think it was pretty obvious who the good guy and who the bad guy were. But it does talk about, why the bad guy thought he was doing the right thing, and so that was nice. Besides that, this is gonna sound bad, but I wanted it to be a little more vicious. I wanted it to be more crazy, more torturous. And that didn't really pop up until the last scene. But yeah, besides that, I think it had great character development. The characters felt very, very real. The language flowed very nicely. It was a good story overall. When you take breaks of filming for mac and cheese, that's how I record. The second book I finished for July was The Illustrated Man by Ray Bradbury. I started this a few months ago, but I didn't finish until July because it was for my YA class that I took in college, and then once school was out, I just wanted to read so many different things. But I eventually picked it back up, which works out, because this is a story about a man who has all these tattoos on his back. He was cursed and everything, and at night, his tattoos come alive to tell stories about the future. And so each little chapter is like a different short story. None of them are really connected. There's none of the same characters or settings or anything like that. It's hard for me to rate this book because some of the stories I loved so much, and then other ones I was like a bit confused in, or I was like, oh, okay. But overall, I did like this very, very much. The third book I finished in July was Peter Pan by J.M. Barrie, and I had to constantly remind myself that this was written in like 1910, because some of it was very jarring. I mean, Tinkerbell was cussing and things like that, and Wendy was such a damsel in distress, but that's how things were back then. It just didn't really feel like a kid's book. It just wasn't what I was expecting. However, the story was still amazing and beautiful and magical, so it's still very, very good overall. The fourth book I finished in July was The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. Don't worry, it's not this big. This is an anthology I have by him, which has some of his plays and short stories and things like that. The Picture of Dorian Gray is about Dorian Gray, who gets a portrait made of himself, and then he starts to realize that the portrait is dealing with all the consequences of life. Like, his portrait is the one that is getting wrinkles and bags under his eyes and things like that, whereas Dorian Gray himself stays very youthful and clean. So that starts to make him wonder, like, well, how far can I make this go? And it's a very moral story. It deals a lot with influence and peer pressure, and is it still considered bad if you don't deal with the consequences and things like that, and I think it is very good overall. The last book I read in July, and the first book I read for BookTube-A-Thon, was One of Us is Lying by Karen McManus, and I loved it. This was so good. It was so modern. It had a person of color in here. It also had an LGBTQ character, and I was so here for it. There is a very, very slight trigger warning for self-harm that I did not see coming. It's very, very small though. And it was surprisingly funny for a murder mystery. If you don't know what this or any of my BookTube-A-Thon books are about, I talk about them in my BookTube-A-Thon TBR, which I will link down below. Anyways, it was surprisingly funny for a murder mystery, and there were some very, very cute scenes. I teared up at the last 10 pages, which I did not expect. The big surprise, plot twist, mystery solved wasn't as grandiose as I expected, but it was still good. I kind of saw it coming for a little bit, but it definitely did tie everything together. And this exhibits some great character development, and I appreciate that so much. It strays so far away from your stereotypical characters, and I loved it. So I thought it was so good, and I would highly recommend it. It was a very good start to my BookTube-A-Thon. And another thing for One of Us is Lying is that I couldn't help but fall in love with all of these characters. You see all of their flaws and all of their secrets and things like that, and as it goes on, you start to understand it more and more, and by the end, I was like, they're all my babies, I don't want any of them to be hurt. So, it's good, it gets you really connected. The second book I read for BookTube-A-Thon was The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. This is my second time I read it. I read it for the first time in, I think, 2014 or 2015 when it first came out, and it was just as good the second time around. This wasn't my book-to-movie adaptation, but I do have to say that the movie version is so detail-oriented. For example, in the movie, in Hazel's room, she has a poster for the Hectic Glow, which in here is one of Gus's favorite bands. And I love that it has little details like that, so I highly recommend the movie and the book. But anyways, I cried at the last 50 pages. I sobbed, like clutching the book to my chest, sobbing. I cried so much more this time around than I did the first time around, and I don't know why. But there's that. Gus will forever be my favorite book boyfriend. Oh my goodness. I just fell in love with him all over again. And I forgot how cynical this book is. I know that some of that does show up in the movie, which I've watched way too many times. And I know that it's about death and everything, but I was like, dang, you're getting a little dark, Hazel, at some points. But it is so good overall. Oh my goodness, I loved rereading it. It was very well needed. The third book I read for BookTube-A-Thon was The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and it was my 5th time reading it. I read it once every year since my junior year of high school. It is my favorite book of all time, which I talk about in my Day 7 vlog, which I will also link down below. And, oh, it's so good. It's so good. I don't know why I love it so much, but it's so, so good. And it was so nice to reread it once again. So it's such a good classic. The fourth book I finished for BookTube-A-Thon was Tales of the Peculiar by Ransom Riggs, and I loved it so much. I love the Peculiar series. I'm so happy that Map of Days is coming out. Oh my goodness. But anyways, this had such beautiful illustrations. I mean, look at that cover first of all. And it's even more beautiful on the inside. And I thought the stories were so good. Some of them were very empowering, some were very cute, some were a little sad at times, and they all had really good morals. And I loved how immersive this was. There are like editor notes, and there's even like a letter from the author, which they say is Millard Nullings, and I was like, my baby! Yay! And I loved it so much. It was so good. Like, all of the stories I loved a lot. And they really felt like bedtime stories that you would grow up with, and I really appreciated that. And the next book that I read for BookTube-A-Thon, but I didn't finish, was Passenger by Alexandra Bracken. I got to page 185-ish, so I got about halfway through. And it's good. I thought the beginning was kind of slow and a little confusing at times. Like, there's some characters that I was very confused about, and I didn't have enough time to connect with before things happened. However, now there's starting to be like a really big plot twist, and I am enjoying it. Now that I know the pace of it, which probably wasn't good for a readathon, I can now, like, sink into it a little bit more, because now I know that it's a bit of a slower pace, but it gets you more connected with the characters. You do find out more about them through their casual dialogue, and that is a very good part. And the language is very good in most parts as well. So I do highly recommend it. It's a very good adventure story so far. I haven't finished it yet, but I will definitely talk about it more when I do an August wrap-up at the end of the month. So overall, I am very, very pleased. Most of the books I loved a reasonable amount, and then some of them I fell so much in love with. It's ridiculous. So let me know how your BookTube-A-Thon went. If you've read any of these books, do you like them, did you not like them, or have I convinced you to read any of these books? Just let me know, let's have a conversation, and I hope you have a wonderful day, and keep reading, and bye!